Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Haley. Haley, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben. This is super fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for the episode today. One thing we always ask our guests before we start is, what do you love about content and marketing? And then let's get to know your work, career, and history a little bit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a question. I would say it's one of my favorite parts because it's kind of the source of everything that I do on a day-to-day basis, is getting the right people to your online digital assets. And you do that because you're telling a story. And I think at the end of the day, that's what brought me into marketing. Is I'm a chatty person, and storytelling, the right story to the right people at the right time. The fact that I get to do that for a living is pretty awesome.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited for the conversation today.
Yeah.
So Haley, what we decided to talk about today is setting boundaries and expectations around content. And a lot of this comes really down to the process of things. But when we talk about this, setting the boundaries and expectations, where does your mind naturally go? And why do we sometimes need to have these processes in place to get the most out of our content?
That's such a good question, because as marketers, it almost seems antithetical to the more creative side of our brain, right? Like, why are we trying to put what we do into this rigid box? And I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to scale. If you want to be able to put out consistent content at a higher volume than what you could do if you were just a small boutique agency, or you were able to work on one long form project for a really long time, which isn't the reality of so many marketers' careers in today's day and age. We need to be able to do more with less. And how do we do that? But with a framework, with a process, with a standard operating procedure. Not only does it allow things to get out the door in a more efficient way, but it also allows you to maintain your brand integrity along the line. So this is where, the demand side of the house and the brand side of the house get along really well, because we're following the rules and we're using the right brand voice and tone and keeping all of those considerations top of mind. There's also, there's a compliance element to it if you're dealing with something in a very regulated space, or you've got disclaimers. So it just keeps it from going off the rails. It takes a creative asset and puts some arms around it so that we're getting the quality and the quantity at the same time for any piece of content that goes out the door.
I love that. So you talked about kind of the two ends of the pendulum and kind of how that really, sometimes it sounds counterintuitive. So when we're trying to create a process, how does that process work for you? Obviously, you're trying something new. There's experimentation, you're learning, you're growing. How do you establish kind of that process to make sure that it's repeatable? And like you said, I love this term, scalable. How do you kind of manage that?
Yeah. So I've always led with an open-mindedness to every single idea that comes my way. I tell my team, I'm like, I want to hear it all, the good ones, the bad ones, the ones that you're laying in bed in the middle of the night and thinking, Haley's going to think this is really stupid, because I won't. I'll think it's awesome. And then what I'll do is I'll take that idea and we'll talk about it. And if it's something that everyone is in alignment that this thing needs to happen, that's when the template comes in. That's when the process comes in. It's just something I created for myself early on in my marketing career. And I've honestly taken this darn thing with me in every single job. I have a brief. I call it a creative brief, but it's not always, a creative thing in the sense of being, graphic design project or something, but any kind of omni-channel campaign, any kind of large initiative that has a lot of moving parts, I've created this framework that allows you to ask the right questions to make sure that every single side of the house, every single step of the process is taken into consideration. So it starts with this very nebulous, very creative, very open-ended idea, and then you put it into the framework. And that's where you give it legs and you can actually see how it's going to get done. And it's got the same set of steps or questions every single time we go through it.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I would be remiss. Any chance you can walk us through some of what that framework and all that kind of looks like?
Yes, absolutely. Without giving away my really rough, it's just a Word document, Ben. And everyone, all my bosses have been like, yep, that'll work. So I've taken this really rough Word document with me everywhere. But it starts with your objective, where it's just a few sentence summary of what you're trying to do and why. There's, I'm just going to rattle off the sections. There's a target audience. So who is the intended recipient of this particular message, initiative, piece of content, whatever it is. Really, not so fun things like budget and timeline and all of the things that come into play with the marketing initiative. And then motivating factors. So looking at our target audience, what is it that they want? What are they looking for? What are their pain points? Because then you address those pain points with the alignment of your solution. So you kind of start with the why, and then you get into the who and the what of your project. That's where a lot of your key value props come in. So I like to keep just kind of a library of value props on the side. And you list out as many as you can find. You're really comprehensive so that when you get to the brief and you've got this very specific target audience and you've got this very specific situation. So it's not just a firmographic thing, but it's also a place and a time, like where they're at right now, which of these value props is going to be most applicable. And then that's what goes into that section. And then there's some other tactical sections like deliverables. Or if it's an omni-channel campaign, it's a digital campaign. What are the tactics that we're going to use? Is it an email campaign? Is it a pay-per-click campaign? Are there any graphic design elements? Do we need to create some things? Because what normally happens is this piece is put together from a project management perspective, and then it goes to the specialists who have to come in on their various steps. The content person who's doing the writing, the graphic designer who's making the visual elements of the piece. There's an SEO component. There's a section for keywords and long-tailed phrases that come into play. It's really a one-stop shop for everyone who's going to touch this initiative. If they have a question, the goal is I should be able to pull up this I should revisit this template, because now talking about it makes me kind of embarrassed by how rough and rudimentary it is. But the goal is that they can come to this one document, and it's a great starting point to get a question answered. It's done its job.
Well, and it sounds super powerful. You talked about you started with why. I mean, there's even a book that's mentioned, start with why and get down into the tactics.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, same here.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of power in that. Now, one follow-up question. Is that distributed to the whole company if someone has an idea, or purely amongst the marketing team? How does that kind of function? How far reaching does the framework go?
It's typically been a marketing department doc, but there's no reason that it couldn't be shared to others internally. It's never intended to be an external facing doc. There might be components that translate into the output, which is an external thing, as a marketer. But we've shared them with other key stakeholders like sales leadership, for example, if we're running an account-based marketing campaign that's really aligned with the sales team, or, the leader of a specific product line for a vertical to ensure that we're representing a product in a new way. And that comes in really key on like a new product launch, for example, where we're not 100% sure if we're being technically accurate. And so many of the products that I market in my role are very technical in nature, and I'm not an electrician. So I need to make sure that I'm not putting out technically inaccurate product details. So if there are other stakeholders, the intent is that it can be shared internally as needed, for sure. I've definitely done that. And we'll use a shared doc and we'll allow them to provide their feedback. And I don't carry out my campaigns in a vacuum. I get cross-functional department involvement as much as possible, because I think that's where the really good stuff comes from. And having this document not only does it help our team execute a project, but it also helps, like if someone's like, hey, what's going on with this thing? Or what's it all about? It's like, okay, I've got this put together. So it's a starting point. Like read this. And if you still have questions, then let's chat.
Yeah, I love that. So to follow up on that as well, you talked about this visibility, right? Like I think that that's a really powerful aspect of processes is there's ability to have visibility into what you're doing. I think a lot of times when we go rogue, people don't know. And then they question what's the value, where if there's a process, you can see what's going on. How do you make that transparent to the rest of the marketing org, the rest of the company? How does the process, what is your process for showing what's going on?
So a lot of meetings, a lot of Slack channels, a lot of, we just use various tools. So we are a fully remote organization. And so we have to use the tools of communication virtually versus having the luxury of being able to get together and talk through things. But that's where, project boards come into play. We have Slack channels for specific initiatives and we provide status updates. If it's a high level enough initiative, we'll give our executives kind of the summary that they can take to the board, kind of a thing. It's whatever method of communication is going to be best received by whoever needs to hear it. Happy to share. Another example is email content is on a calendar. And I'm sure a lot of organizations have a similar content calendar. But when you're doing email marketing for 8 different brands at one time, and a lot of cross-selling happens because your audience is shared across lines, which is a great, synergistic opportunity. But it requires everyone to be able to see who's getting what email and when, and how often are we hitting certain lists so that we're not making our lists experience email fatigue. We're monitoring our engagement rates and our mitigating our opt-out rates and that kind of a thing. And that's a shared living, breathing document with a key that everyone can understand, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page about what we're doing. It's also a constant evolution too, right? Like we've got this, using this calendar as an example, we've had it for as long as I've been with the company, and it's very colorful. It's really grown. The team's grown. The amount of products and verticals under our area of our responsibility have grown, which comes with complexity. And so we have to think critically about, okay, is this still making the most sense? How can we make this more optimized for everyone? Does everyone have a shared understanding of what these things mean? Are we all using it in the same way? If not, is there a best practice to be shared? So really just kind of taking your ego out of the conversation just because you've been doing something one way for a really long time, and being able to reassess often. And a shared accessible document like that allows you to do it, because in theory, you don't have a versioning issue if everyone's working off one doc. So it's really just an interpretation of what we're all working with, and being able to get aligned about what that means.
And I love this last point, because this is super interesting to me. I think when a lot of people talk about process and setting up some guardrails around what you do and how it functions, they think about rigidity and the lack of ability to be flexible, to collaborate and things like that. So I love that even though you have a process, you are focused on saying, hey, break down the process. If we can do this better, if we can improve, here's visibility. If you have ideas, we will change the process. And it sounds like you get some really good buy-in on that, because everyone has their opportunity to say their piece instead of, this is the way it is, just deal with it.
Right.
Hey, if you've got an opportunity to make this better, we want to hear about it and we'll all grow together. I think that is one of the most important things for anyone. And I know you're not specifically in an operations role, but anyone touching operations in a business, and no matter what role you're in marketing, you're going to have to touch it. You have to have flexibility and the willingness to change, because I think that will get you so much more buy-in and how everything goes along. Because it sounds like you started with a content calendar, but it evolves, it changes, there's new stuff. You can't just keep it the same way, right?
Right.
Love it.
I mean,
so we're coming close to the end. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think flexibility and the willingness to change, or not even the willingness, but just the acknowledgement that there is nothing constant except for constant change, and just being like, okay, well, what does that mean in this new environment? Taking personal things out of the equation and just looking at a situation for what it is has really helped get just buy-in and build a really agile, flexible team. It's been one of the skills that I've been proud to take from job to job, because if you're open to things changing, then I don't even think you realize how much better, like you don't see the opportunities for improvement the way you would if you were just doing the same thing over and over. And so I love what you called out. Even within a structured framework that helps you scale and maintain quality, you need to be able to not build in, but have an awareness and an acknowledgement that things change all the time and everything's open for discussion.
I love that. And I think that that's the perfect way to end off this episode. The ability to build frameworks and structure is vital, but just as important is the ability to be flexible and improve and let those evolve into what they need to become. So many good insights. I have absolutely loved this. Haley, if anyone has questions or wants to further the conversation with you online, how and where can they find you?
Ben, thank you for having me. This has been an absolute blast. I think I was telling you earlier, I come from a broadcasting background, and the opportunity to just like chat with a like-minded marketer, and I absolutely love it. So thank you. This was so fun. If anyone wanted to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Haley Parr, and I'd love to have any conversations that anyone wants to have.
Love it. Love it. And again, thank you so much for the time and insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.